One of these will make you question a decision you made this week. Stick around for the last one, it's the reason you think you knew it all along. You spin a wheel that lands on 65, then get asked to guess how many countries are in Africa. Chances are your guess creeps upward, even though the wheel has nothing to do with geography. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman ran exactly this test in 1974, and people anchored on that random number every time. Car dealers use the same trick with sticker prices, and negotiators use it by naming a number first, any number, just to set the gravity of the whole conversation. Once a figure is in your head, you don't ignore it, you adjust from it, and that adjustment almost never goes far enough. That's why the first offer in any negotiation matters more than it should. Add a small, overpriced popcorn to a menu and suddenly the medium looks like a steal, even though nobody wanted the small one anyway. That's the Decoy Effect, first documented by Joel Huber, John Payne, and Christopher Puto in 1982. They showed that adding a third option, one that's clearly worse than one existing choice but not the other, shifts preference toward the option it makes look best by comparison. Movie theaters and streaming services use this constantly, stacking a barely worse tier next to the one they actually want to sell you. Later research found the effect shrinks or disappears in some product categories, so it's not universal, but in the right context that decoy is doing real work on your wallet. Build your own wobbly Ikea shelf and you'll swear it's worth more than an identical one that came fully assembled. Michael Norton, Daniel Mochon, and Dan Ariely tested this in 2012, having participants either build furniture themselves or examine a pre-built version, then asking them to bid on it. The builders consistently valued their own creation higher, boxes and all, flaws included. It's not that the furniture got better, it's that the effort of making it got folded into how much they liked it. This is why letting customers customize even a small part of a product, a sandwich, a sneaker, a playlist, makes them attached to it more than logic says they should. You sit through a terrible movie because you already paid for the ticket, not because you're enjoying it. How Arkes and Blumer documented this pattern in 1985, showing people keep pouring money or time into a failing choice simply because of what they've already put in, not what's likely to come next. In their studies, people who'd already spent money on a ski trip kept going even after learning a better trip was available for less. Businesses do this with failing projects, and governments do it with failed programs, doubling down instead of cutting losses. Later work found the effect isn't consistent across everyone or every situation, but the pull toward finishing what you started, even when it's clearly not worth it, shows up again and again. Tell someone a surgery has a 90% survival rate and they'll take it. Tell them the exact same surgery has a 10% death rate, and suddenly they hesitate, even though the numbers are identical. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman demonstrated this in 1981 with their famous disease problem, where the same outcome, framed as a gain or a loss, flipped which option most people chose. Doctors, insurance sellers, and politicians all know that how you word a statistic changes what people do with it more than the statistic itself does. Later replications found the effect holds up, but the size of the shift depends heavily on exactly how the choice is worded, so it's real, just not as fixed as the original demo made it look. Your brain rates a risk by how fast examples pop into your head, not by how often it actually happens. Tversky and Kahneman named this the availability heuristic in 1973, and it means vivid, recent, or heavily reported events feel more likely than they really are. Think about plane crashes, they get non-stop coverage, so they feel more dangerous than driving, even though car crashes kill far more people every year. Your mind is using memory ease as a shortcut for probability, and that shortcut misfires whenever the news cycle isn't a random sample of reality. One dramatic headline can shift how safe you feel more than a decade of dry statistics ever could. Once you know how something turned out, your brain quietly rewrites how certain you felt beforehand. Baruch Fischhoff tested this in 1975 by having people predict outcomes and then, after learning the result, recall their own earlier confidence, and they consistently remembered being more sure than they actually were. Watch any sports bar after a big upset, fans swear they called it from the start, even if they'd bet the other way an hour earlier. The outcome doesn't just inform your memory, it edits it. That matters because it makes past decisions look more predictable than they were, so you stop learning from real uncertainty. Give someone an active role in a random event, and they'll believe they controlled the outcome even when chance ran the whole show. Ellen Langer's 1975 studies found that people who picked their own lottery numbers demanded more money to sell their ticket than people who were simply handed random numbers, despite identical odds. It's the same reason gamblers blow on dice or throw them harder for a big number. Choosing, touching, or acting on something creates a feeling of skill where none exists. That illusion keeps people gambling longer and overestimating their grip on outcomes that were never theirs to control in the first place. You will underestimate how long your next project takes, even if the last 5 ran late. Roger Buehler, Dale Griffin, and Michael Ross tracked students finishing an honors thesis in 1994. On average they predicted around 34 days if things went well, but the actual average completion time was closer to 56 days, and most missed even their own worst-case guess. Think about how every home renovation ends up taking twice as long as the contractor promised. The problem is people plan around the best-case scenario and ignore how their own past attempts actually went. That gap between prediction and reality quietly wrecks deadlines, budgets, and trust in your own timeline. Given a choice between changing something and leaving it alone, you'll leave it alone, even when switching would clearly help you. William Samuelson and Richard Zeckhauser demonstrated this in 1988, showing people stuck with their existing portfolio or insurance option far more often than a neutral comparison of the options would predict. It's why most employees stay on whatever retirement plan their company set as the default, and why you probably still bank with whoever opened your first teenage account. Doing nothing feels safer than doing something, even when nothing is the riskier choice. Companies exploit this constantly by quietly making the option they want you to pick the default one. Here's something wild: you don't search for truth, you search for proof you're already right. Psychologist Peter Wason showed this in 1960, giving people a number sequence like 2, 4, 6 and asking them to guess the rule. Almost everyone tested guesses that would confirm their first idea, and almost nobody tried one designed to break it, because confirming evidence feels effortless to accept, while contradicting evidence feels like work. You do this every time you Google a symptom hoping for reassurance, or follow accounts that already agree with you. Even trained scientists aren't immune to it. It matters because the bias never feels like bias from the inside. It feels like being right. You judge a stranger's whole character from one bad moment, and ignore the situation that caused it. In 1967 Edward Jones and Victor Harris had people read essays either supporting or attacking Fidel Castro, then rate the writer's real opinion, even when they were told the writer had been assigned that position and had no choice. People still assumed the essay reflected the writer's true belief. You do this when a driver cuts you off and you decide they're a jerk, instead of guessing they're late for something urgent. Later research found the effect shrinks in more collectivist cultures, so it's not universal the way it once looked. It matters because it makes you harsher on others than you'd ever be on yourself in the same spot. You'll like something more just because you've seen it before, with zero new information added. Robert Zajonc showed this in 1968, he flashed strangers' faces and made up characters at people repeatedly, and the more times someone saw an image, the more they rated it as likable, even when they couldn't consciously recall seeing it. It's why the songs you hated the first time on the radio become your favorites by the 10th play, and why brands run the same ad for months instead of switching it up. The repetition itself makes the image easier for your brain to process, and that ease gets mistaken for liking. It matters because your preferences aren't as personal as they feel, a lot of them are just familiarity in disguise. The less competent you are at something, the more confident you might feel about it. Justin Kruger and David Dunning tested this in 1999, asking people to rate their own grammar, logic, and humor skills against actual test scores. The bottom scoring group overestimated their ability by the widest margin. But here's the twist critics raised later: some of that pattern shows up just from averaging test scores near a scale's edges, a statistical artifact, not pure psychology. So the effect is real in the original data but weaker and messier than the meme version. Think of a new employee who's sure they've mastered the job in week 1. It matters because the people most likely to overestimate themselves are the least equipped to notice they're doing it. You can spot every bias in other people's thinking except your own. Emily Pronine, Daniel Lin, and Lee Ross named this in 2002, after asking people to rate how susceptible they were to common biases compared to their peers. Most rated themselves as less biased than the average person, which is, itself, a biased judgment. Think of the friend who insists their political opinions are pure logic while everyone else is just brainwashed by media. Researchers still don't know exactly why introspection fails here. You likely have access to your conscious reasoning but none at all to the automatic shortcuts running underneath it. It matters because feeling unbiased is not evidence of being unbiased, it might be the bias itself. You'll pay more to keep a mug than you'd ever pay to buy the exact same mug. Richard Thaler, Daniel Kahneman and Jack Netsch ran an experiment in 1990 where half a group got a coffee mug and half didn't. Owners demanded roughly twice as much to sell it as buyers were willing to pay to buy it. The mechanism is loss aversion. Once something is yours, giving it up registers as a loss, and losses hurt more than equivalent gains feel good. Later studies with experienced traders found the gap shrinks with market practice, so it isn't a fixed rule of the mind. Still, it's why it's so hard to sell an old car for what it's really worth, and why free trials work so well once the product is already in your hands. Your memory of a colonoscopy has almost nothing to do with how long it actually hurt. Donald Riedelmeier and Daniel Kahneman had patients rate their pain every 60 seconds during the procedure, then rate the whole experience afterward, in a 1996 study. The overall memory tracked the worst moment and the final moments, not the pain added up over time. A longer procedure that ended gently was remembered as better than a shorter one that ended badly. This is the peak-end rule: memory edits out duration almost entirely. It's why a vacation that ends with a missed flight feels ruined even if the first 9 days were perfect, and why a bad meal followed by a great dessert gets remembered fondly. After 4 coin flips land heads, most people feel the next one owes them tails. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman documented this in 1971. Each flip is independent, 50-50 every single time, but a run of the same outcome feels statistically unstable, so people expect it to correct itself. The mechanism is the representativeness heuristic. We expect even short random sequences to resemble the long-run average, so a streak feels due to reverse. This is exactly what happens at a roulette table after a run of reds. Bets pile onto black, even though the wheel has no memory of the last spin. It matters because this fallacy has emptied real wallets on nothing more than a misread pattern. Judges shown a stranger's photo will also guess that person is smarter, kinder, and more trustworthy, traits the photo can't possibly reveal. Edward Thorndike named this pattern in 1920, and Richard Nisbet and Timothy Wilson's 1977 study found students rated a lecturer's appearance and accent as more likable simply because he came across as warm on video, without noticing that one impression was steering the rest. The exact cognitive process behind it isn't fully mapped, but one strong positive trait seems to bleed into judgments of totally unrelated traits. It's why attractive job candidates get rated as more competent on paper, and why a charming CEO can survive bad quarterly numbers longer than a dull one. One trait quietly writes the whole story. A single $100 bill feels harder to spend than 5 20s, even though they're worth exactly the same. Priya Raghubar and Joydeep Srivastava documented this in 2009. People handed one large bill were less willing to break it for small purchases than people handed the equivalent value in smaller notes. Nobody has pinned down the exact mental process behind it, but the leading idea is that large bills get mentally filed as savings, while loose small notes feel like disposable pocket change. It's why you'll casually spend 5 $1 bills on coffee but hesitate to break a crisp 50 for the same drink. Retailers exploit this by handing back change in the smallest denominations possible, since fragmented money tends to leave your wallet faster. Here's something strange: hearing a claim twice makes it feel more true, even if it's false and even if you already know better. Hasher, Goldstein, and Topino showed this back in 1977. People rated repeated statements as more believable purely because they'd seen them before, with no new evidence attached. Your brain reads that familiarity as a shortcut for accuracy. If a sentence feels smooth and easy to process, it must be right. Think of a slogan you've heard 100 times, or a rumor that keeps circulating online. By the 10th exposure it just feels true. Fazio, Rand, and Pennycook found in 2019 that this still happens even when people technically know the fact is false. That's why repetition works as propaganda, not just as marketing. Once you know something, it's almost impossible to imagine not knowing it, and that quietly wrecks your communication. Kammerer, Lowenstein, and Weber studied this in 1989 in trading markets, where people holding private information acted as though everyone else already had it too, even when they logically knew otherwise. Picture a manager explaining a project in jargon, certain it's obvious, because it's obvious to them. Or a parent frustrated a kid just doesn't get it, forgetting they once didn't get it either. Your own knowledge seems to leak into your model of what other people can see, and you can't fully switch it off. That's why good teaching and good writing both require deliberately fighting what you already know. You'll usually choose a known risk over an unknown one, even when the unknown option could be just as good, or better. Daniel Ellsberg demonstrated this in 1961 with a simple bet. People preferred drawing from an urn with known odds over one with unstated odds, even though the math gave them no reason to. Picture choosing a job with a clear, average salary over a role with vague but possibly higher pay. Most people take the certainty every time. Insurance companies lean on this too, selling detailed policies for risks people barely face, because vague danger feels scarier than defined danger. Nobody's fully explained why not knowing itself feels threatening, it just reliably changes what you'll gamble on. You're not avoiding risk. You're avoiding uncertainty about the risk. People have a strange habit of assuming that if something bad happened to you, you probably deserved it. Lerner and Simmons showed this in 1966. Participants who watched someone being punished, even in a clearly random, rigged setup, rated that person as less likable and more blameworthy afterward, just for being unlucky. It's why victims of crime or poverty get asked what they did to invite it, instead of what actually happened to them. The belief seems to protect the comforting idea, that the world is fair, and bad things only land on bad people. That protects your own sense of safety, but it quietly turns you into someone who blames victims instead of circumstances. Once you notice it, you'll catch yourself doing it in the first sentence after hearing bad news. A single harsh comment can undo a dozen compliments, and that's not just in your head. Baumeister, Bratslavsky, Finkenauer, and Voss reviewed decades of research in 2001 and concluded that bad events and emotions consistently carry more psychological weight than equally strong good ones. Picture a performance review with 9 positive notes and 1 piece of criticism. You'll remember the criticism for weeks and forget most of the praise by Friday. Why negative information hits harder isn't settled science, it's simply a consistent pattern across memory, emotion, and relationships. That imbalance means one bad experience can quietly outweigh a long stretch of good ones in how you judge a person, a job, or your own day. You probably think you're less likely than everyone else to get divorced, lose your job, or get into a car accident. That's not confidence, it's a documented bias. Neil Weinstein's 1980 study had people compare their own odds against their peers for dozens of good and bad life events, and most rated themselves as safer than average on nearly every negative one. Think about how many smokers genuinely believe they'll personally beat the odds on lung disease, even knowing the statistics. This shows up across age, income, and education levels, and it's a big reason people underinsure, undersave, and skip health screenings. Believing you're the exception feels good, but it's also exactly why the exception rarely turns out to be you. You walk into a room with a stain on your shirt and feel like every eye is locked onto it. It isn't. Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky in 2000 had students wear an embarrassing t-shirt into a room of strangers, then guess how many people had noticed. The number people guessed was roughly twice the number who actually remembered seeing it. This happens because you're anchored on your own overwhelming awareness of yourself, and you don't adjust enough for how little spare attention anyone else actually has. It matters because most of the social anxiety you carry about being judged is aimed at an audience that barely clocked you in the first place. Which one of these has quietly cost you money or time without you noticing?